Hey everyone, I'm gonna get us going just so that we have at the very least the hour that we scheduled if for conversations and updates. I want to say that this is a follow-up meeting to just about every other Zoom meeting that we've been having as it relates to COVID. But more so, given last week's updates from Vice President for Community Colleges Erica Lacroix and Associate Vice President Una Basami, in essence, sharing a little bit of the University of Hawaii's position, the Board of Regents' expectations, President Lasner's expectations, and just a general perspective on the state budget and that of the university and how that more or less trickles to Leeward. In a little bit, I'm going to ask Mark to share a presentation with us that should take a couple of minutes, but I did want to set the tone to some extent. So as we've been sharing all along, the state is really struggling, and actually, as recently as yesterday, when the governor was in one of his periodic updates, he shared that the October 1st reopen for tourism may not be realistic, given the testing scenarios that they wanted to apply to bring back tourism. That being said, it continues to create a deeper hole on the state's budget and therefore every state agency, including the university. Given the different scenarios and the fact that we don't have any locked in numbers, so the governor hasn't released our budget per se, he hasn't given us a number to play with for this year, and all we have are projections based on, educated guess. And so this information has been shared pretty broadly. The estimated and educated guesses have been shared with the Board of Regents, have been shared with us. We have some numbers that we play with, and we have some steps that we've already taken to help address some of the challenges. But in the big picture, so that we're all starting on more or less the same place, the state is projecting, or rather the university and the state are projecting, that we are going to have about a 16% reduction in our general fund appropriations, on top of a 5% reduction in our tuition revenues. And so what the Board of Regents have been asking and the UH leadership have been asking is that we find a way of having a budget for this year, next year, what it would look like, and what steps are we going to take to more or less balance the budget, with an additional carrot to the conversation. So the university is a huge driving force to the state's economy. And so the Board of Regents and just about everyone, honestly, including myself, we want to make sure that we position ourselves to support the state as we're trying to dig ourselves out of the hole that we're in. With the biggest situation being that we rely very heavily on tourism, and we need to diversify the revenue sources for the state. And so, long story short, the University of Hawaii is projecting out that we're going to be about $91 million in the hole. Now, we are seeing some updated numbers that reflect current year, and the numbers don't look as bad as that $91 million. But the reality is that we are looking a little bit better because we've basically cut entirely on travel. We haven't hired vacancies. We haven't backfilled positions. They've swept some positions away from us. And the reality is that that's not a sustainable approach, right? It's not sustainable to basically cripple the university. And so we have to find ways of helping balance the budget, bring in revenue, and align our efforts to support the university. And so VP Lacroix's presentation last week basically set the tone to seeking feedback on a couple of different areas. One of those is, where can we generate some cost savings, right? Because we need to reduce our expenses so that we could balance out the whole deficit in revenues. Where can we generate more revenue, okay? And how can we position ourselves a little bit better to support the state as we evolve from a tourism-centric economy? right? And so these are the three major umbrellas. The underlying tone behind all of that is, how do we get to balancing the budget, right? How do we get to figuring a way of contributing toward that $91 million deficit? Because whether we're not currently buying equipment or traveling or all of that, that's an interim situation. As a university, we're not able to survive without professional development, without investments in areas that would require us to travel or hire other positions. And so we need to be pretty intentional in how we do all of this. And so the last carrot before I send it over to Mark is that I'm going to acknowledge that because of past leadership, including folks that work here at Leeward, Leeward is a well-oiled machine that is very lean. And so the suggestion that there are opportunities for reductions and blah, 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 it's a representation of the university as a whole and the state as a whole, okay? And so I recognize that it's going to be more difficult for Leeward to be a major contributor to that, but we are still within the same, we're part of the family, right? And so we all need to pivot however it takes to work out the whole budget situation. As a result of that, there are conversations that sound pretty scary, and truth be told, including for myself, they sound scary because the narratives go anywhere from closing campuses to reducing. Some of the ideas that have been submitted is to maybe cut administrative salaries or cut administrative positions. All of that is part of the equation, right? And all of that impacts us all, myself included. And so it's a scary narrative, but there is nothing that I'm, at the very least at this point, aware of that is really a well-baked idea. So it's all just brainstorming to see what are ways that we could manage the budgetary challenges that we're in and hopefully not hurt too much. After Mark presents his budgetary slides for Leeward that are a little bit more Leeward centric, I do want to go over a little bit of the feedback that was collected and share a little bit of how we can maybe manage some of the ideas that we develop here at Leeward and help contribute to the cause. But I did want to say that I'm not blind to the fact that Leeward, compared to almost any other UH entity, is in a different place. And that has resulted in our current financial situation. And so we're not blind to that, but the discussion is still, we're part of it all, right? And we have to help contribute in some capacity. So at this point, I'm going to punt it over to Mark so that he could share a little bit more on the Leeward-centric numbers.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. Hi, everybody. Let me just power this up. Okay. Let me know. Do we have visibility here?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I can see it.
All right, thank you, everybody. Just a few slides to go over Leeward specific kind of things. I know Erica and Mike touched on some of this last week, but we'll just go to a little more granular for your information, and so that you're prepared for the discussions that we'll be undertaking. So here's the basic issue at large. Carlos mentioned this. State of Hawaii is about a $2.5 billion shortfall in funding for this fiscal year, the fiscal year that we're in the third month of already. So the state has a $2.5 billion shortfall. The University of Hawaii's share of that is in this $91 million range. And for Leeward specifically, we're at about 4 million. Again, these are for this fiscal year. This information has already been shared with a couple different times, at least a couple different times, with the Board of Regents. So if you want to get more information from the university perspective, all the materials are on the Board of Regent website, and you just got to drill down into the meeting materials and that kind of thing. This is one of the slides that I took from that presentation and then adapted it just slightly to give you a little bit more context and a little history. The last time the university faced and the state faced major budget reductions was back in the Great Recession that occurred in 09, 10, 11. And so during that time, as a lot of you will recall, we took a dip in funding, and but at the same time, our enrollments ended up reaching all-time records during that dip. And so this chart sort of maps out the general fund dollars that the university, this is at the university level, that the general fund dollars that the university received in blue. The orange represents the tuition funding that the university received for each of those years. And so you can see the trends as the Great Recession hit in the blue bars, how long it took for the state to give us as much money as we had back in 2009. It wasn't until 2018, 9 years later, until we had received equal amounts of money from general fund dollars. The inverse is true for tuition. As our enrollment grew, tuition became a larger proportional share of our total funding. And that is still true to this day. Back in 2009, which is an important point, back in 2009, the proportion of general fund to tuition was this 70-30 split or thereabouts. Projecting into 2021, it's now a 60-40 split. So there's a greater reliance during these down years on us to increase enrollments because we have that tuition revenue kind of flexibility. Not all state departments have that. And so the university is lucky in that regard. Some of the state departments take a real hard hit because they're almost solely reliant on general fund revenues. So it takes them sometimes a little bit longer to come out of these down cycles in funding. So it's a very revealing chart. And what we've been told by economists and everything, that the dip that we're going to have in general fund revenues is going to be greater than what occurred in the Great Recession. So that's something to keep in mind, that it took us 9 years to get out of that as far as general fund revenues are concerned, okay? For Leeward's budget specifically, I mentioned that 60-40 split between general funds and tuition. That's exactly where we're at. We're sort of representative of the university at large. Our operating budget is made up of two primary sources, general fund appropriations and our tuition. And right now, based upon the latest projections, 59% of our funding comes from general fund. These numbers are going to be, they're a little bit flexible and right now as we get our firm numbers from fall semester and then projecting out for spring and what our enrollments will be. And the estimated budget reduction that we're displaying, the 4.2 million, again, is an estimate based upon the university's best estimate at the time. At this time. Okay. So that's on the revenue side. On the expense side, no surprise, right? 80% of our expenses for operating come from payroll, personnel costs. 20% of our budget is in other current expenses, and a large share of the other current expenses are already committed for such things as utility costs and contractual agreements that we have. Our debt service payments for the Waianae Moku property. So at the end of the day, when we're talking about significant budget challenges, personnel, people, that kind of thing are usually part of the equation, and there's no other way around it. So some of the highlights here that the system office has challenged us with is that, and you can see it over on the far right-hand column, that they would like overtime reduced by 75% from previous year's actuals, that we should reduce lecture costs by 25%, overload by 75%, student help by 25%, and the like. So those are targets. They're not real hard and firm at this time, but they're targets and something for planning purposes, okay? All right. The other part of the expense, it's really not an expense, but it sort of gets classified as an expense, are the transfers that go between the 10 campuses and system offices for different kinds of programmatic or cost. And the transfers out of the money that we get are far greater than what we get in. And so back in the day when we were getting performance funding and enrollment growth funding, the system office would transfer those monies to us through this transfer route. But here you can see a lot of red, and that indicates transfers out of our campus budget to fund these different kinds of things at the system level. I mentioned debt service for Waianae, debt service for our energy conservation projects, the Banner student information transfer out. So there's a whole host of things that all campuses get charged for from a system level, and the funds are taken out of the campus budgets. So on balance, for the campus, we're looking at a $3.4 to $3.5 million funding deficit for this current year, okay? This does not take into account any cost savings or fund balances or cash balances that we've had from previous fiscal years. This is just a look at revenues and expenses that we anticipate for this year alone. And so Carlos and I have been talking about a $4 million cut, so or out of balance condition. And so sometimes when, so it could be 3.5, it could be 4. It just depends because sometimes if we want to grow revenues, and Carlos mentioned one of these things that we have to talk about is, are there opportunities for revenue generation? And sometimes you need to invest in those activities that will help promote revenue generation. And so to do that, sometimes you overcut in specific areas, take those dollars and reinvest it in other revenue generating kinds of activities. Okay, so that's sort of part of the calculus that we're looking at, sort of in this range of 3.5 to 4 million, depending upon what kind of strategic investments that we want to make as a campus. And so just to maybe get some talking points out there on solutions, we do have cash balances and fund balances available to use. However, the Board of Regents has been very adamant in in their discussions with the university administration about not dipping too much too fast into our reserve balances. Right now, our tuition fund balance is about $8.5 million. So that's really good. And that's a savings of over many years, probably since the Great Recession occurred when our enrollment spiked. And so we were able to save money and put that away for a rainy day. And our rainy day has now came in the form of a hurricane right now. So, but we can use that. And the board guidance is to say, hey, campuses, you can use your fund balances that you've built up over time, but let's limit it to 25%, no more than 25% in any given fiscal year. So assuming we have a $4 million out of balance condition, we can use up to, by that logic, about $2.1 million in our tuition fund balance to cover our current year funding shortfall. The cautionary note here is that the tuition balances, fund balances from previous years are one-time only monies. They will go away as soon as we start using them, right? And then So that kind of thing worries me. I think I'm sure it worries Carlos and other administrators too, that we can't go to that well too often before that it's dried up. So that's one thing that we can use temporarily to see us through this. And then I've listed some other kinds of items that we could think about using or different options without too much difficulty. I mean, there's CARES funding that we've been using to help defray some of the costs related to COVID and that kind of thing. I think we need to invest in student recruiting and enrollment strategies. There's opportunities always for extramural funding, but all campuses, universities and colleges all over America are going to be looking at extramural funding too. So I'm sure it's going to be pretty competitive. And there are opportunities to use summer session in a way that we have not done in the past. So we do make some money during our summer sessions. And so maybe we can utilize that a little bit more fully than we've had. Okay. So I'll stop here and turn it back over to Carlos to continue our discussion.
There's a question on the chat back in the chat for you.
Okay. Can you read the question? I just don't, I'm not getting there very quick. What is the question, Carlos?
That was my question, Mark.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, on your transfers, line L, debt service, can you please speak a little bit more to that?
Is this for Waianae or what?
The
energy
I'm not sure.
conservation. Yeah, the energy conservation projects. All has to deal with all the improvements that all 7 campuses have received over the last several years to improve efficiencies from an electricity standpoint, whether it's replacement of our chiller plant, the installation and construction and installation of our photovoltaic panels, the lighting, all the lighting, indoor and outdoor lighting that has gone on over the years. We basically had UH revenue bonds pay for that work. And now we're in the process of repaying that over the next several years. And so that transfer of more than $400,000 is our share of that sort of mortgage payment or lease payment for all that work that was done on campus.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Mark and everyone. So as we carry on a little bit more of the conversation, some of the questions that have been percolating, right, is how are these ideas more or less going to be vetted? Who's making the decision? When are we making the decision? And blah, 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 and all of these questions. And I want to say that for the most part, in all honesty, I think that COVID caught us all by surprise. The budgetary piece, the challenges as a result of COVID, I don't believe are a surprise because I think that from April, we've been more or less tripping over the fact that we would likely be facing something like this. But how these ideas are, getting cooked up and what we will likely be able to do are things that it's not well developed yet. And so I think that all of the community colleges have expressed their concerns to VP Lacroix to find a way of sharing what these ideas may be coming about. And so there was a strategic planning meeting last week where that question came up again. And so for UHCC, we're looking for a way of sharing how all of these ideas are coming together so that everyone gets a sense of what everyone else is saying. Locally, we have a little bit better control of that, but it's still a monster, you guys. I mean, it's really difficult. Like when we were going through the exercise of asking Leeward to dream, it was intended for, growth and, just honestly dreaming. Here, we have more of an outcome that's expected in a very short time frame in collecting that feedback. And so a couple of things. We are charged here at Leeward with identifying opportunities that we can act on, and some of these are things that we decide on, right? So if there are areas for revenue generating, areas of investment, if we think that we could coordinate our services differently, if we think that we could share something differently, that's up to us. So we will figure those out. There's another layer that has to do with the possibility of the 7 community colleges or the 10 UH entities basically working together in other ways, right? And so are there services that could theoretically be centralized? Are there things where maybe like Windward and Leeward could work in some capacity together? West Oahu and Leeward could work in some capacity and potentially have cost savings. Those decisions, while we may be able to contribute and give them form, are things that are ultimately going to happen maybe among the chancellors for the CCs or even higher with the president and the officers for the university. Those processes are not really well set up yet to share that, okay, this idea is going to go from here to there and we're going to collect feedback and then it's going to happen. We're still basically building this plane as we fly it. And so with that being said, I don't want Leeward to necessarily not provide feedback because we are probably in the better financial situation, right? And so what's going to happen is that because we are all tied at the hip, if all of the community colleges decide to do something, we're going to go along with them. And so I've said this in other meetings, and it's kind of difficult to say it in such a broad audience, but there are advantages and disadvantages to being part of a system. Right now, we are probably at a slight disadvantage because we all work together and we're the ones that are a little bit better off. And so we will hurt just the same with everyone else because we are part of the system. And again, advantages and disadvantages to everything. And so what I did, I can't remember when. I don't know when I sent the invitation for this meeting. Was it last week? In any event, there's a link at the bottom of that email, and I will send that out again, where you could contribute to a couple of different things. For instance, if you have any ideas on reducing costs or increasing revenue or aligning our programming, we're collecting that feedback. But what I had really asked for, because I want this to be a little bit better controlled and managed, is if you work through your unit heads or division chairs to gather and cook up that input a little bit more because you're in alike functions. And so you could all share those ideas and see where they can come together, and we'll find ways of gathering that data, that information, and we'll continue sharing. And so I don't know what that sharing would look like because, I mean, anything from, again, a closure of a campus right down to, reducing our toilet paper consumption. These are all ideas that could come together. And we may begin acting on some of them because we have a little bit more control than others. But at the same time, it'd be nice for all of us to get a sense of what other people are contributing, right? And so what I wanted to do for the next couple of minutes is basically share some of the things that I've already heard so that you get a sense of what people are thinking about, right? And so some of these have been submissions, right? Submissions through that link that we put together. For instance, with increasing in revenue, looking at statewide efforts in developing the trades, right? Maybe working more on some of the non-credit workforce development that maybe HANCC has and maybe offer them in different places. Those are opportunities for revenue generating because we're trying to mitigate unemployment and all of these other things. So we got to do an intentional analysis of what the workforce demands are and where we can invest, right? In a way in which we're aligning our offerings and at the same time, you know, maybe finding a way of having some revenue generation. The other one, which is really popular, by the way, so this one came in a few times, is we need to market. We need to market the heck out of what we do, right? We need to be the best, you know, communicators of what we offer so that we can increase on that enrollment and we could improve on our revenue generation. There are concerns that have been communicated, and some of these have been communicated even through our Zooms and even with Erica's presentation. And that is, we don't want to cripple ourselves, right? And so there is just so much that we could do and still remain nimble enough to support the community. And so one of the concerns is whether there are campus closures or maybe we merge programs or we reduce the duplication of programs on the island, is are students gonna really travel? I mean, are we really just shooting ourselves in the foot by basically saying, okay, HANCC has the market on this and Leeward has the market on this. Are students gonna really move around, right? And so are we really just gonna cripple the situation a little bit more? And so all of these are things that I'm taking as feedback, and I can share that with VP LaCroix and any other setting that we're, you know, reporting to. But at some point, I want to put together something that's at least a list of ideas that I share with us here at Leeward that then ultimately goes to VP LaCroix with opportunities where we could all work together. I'll share. Thank you, Tad. I was about to post a link to there. The link is on the chat box if you want to contribute ideas. We will be sending another email out to gather more. But remember, I want you guys to work, you know, preferably through your chair or unit head, so that you guys could have more localized discussions on what really can make a difference without, you know, hurting us too much. You know, there's been conversations about possibly, you know, retirement incentives. There have been discussions. I mean, like a lot of stuff. I am really selfish, right? Because it worries me that a bunch of smart people that know what we represent retire, and then I'm not able to backfill. And so it puts us in a real tight position. So we got to have, you know, discussions on all sides of the equation. There were some discussions, and if you were part of VP LaCroix's presentation, someone suggested, you know, the closure of another campus on Oahu, right? There have been conversations about maybe West Oahu should come back here, right? Maybe we should retake the angle on the first 2 years and allow West Oahu to do only the latter 2 years. There have been discussions to capitalize on the campuses that are on the rails line, right? And so there's a lot of conversations happening. I'm not 100% sure of everything that's been discussed from the other community colleges or the four-year institutions. But then there are also conversations on the programmatic side, right? Are all should all existing programs remain? Should there be some opportunities where we, you know, maybe, stop out certain programs? Well, again, we bring back the perspective of Leeward, and we're not that heavy, right? We're pretty lean. And so there may not be that much opportunity there, but are there opportunities where there may be programs that are duplicated even with in Oahu? Programs that maybe online can still serve, right? It's difficult to suggest, you know, not duplicating programs if it's equipment intensive. But if it isn't equipment intensive, can we do a little bit more there? Are there other services that we could, centralize or work through in a way in which, for instance, HANCC and Leeward share something? In all, again, trying to get to a balanced budget, but at the same time, not putting ourselves in that position where we can't function. And so that's what I've been getting. There have been more ideas on revenue generating, the suggestion of even bringing in MOOCs to the equation, and how we could do other opportunities. Yeah, I don't know, Momi. I haven't heard about that topic, but again, if there's anything, I would love if you guys could help contributing them in a way in which I can do a few things. One, report it out to all of us, because like I'm doing right now, it's not intended to hide any ideas. Shoot, there are ideas out there of maybe, reducing the number of chancellors. That's up as a consideration as well. And so I'm not hiding them, but I do want us to have identity coming out of Leeward and our ideas that are shared. Because I do think that Leeward is in a good place regionally, in a good place academically, in a good place financially. It would be devastating to really destabilize us. But at the same time, as Mark shared, there are some number metrics that we need to get to, right? And so timeline, right? So the reason that we're not saying, okay, let's go through the program review and then go through all of our process is because it takes a really long time to go through our typical process. The ideas may result in us being told, okay, let's take a look at these areas, right? Assess how we are doing, maybe make some recommendations, and it may take a full year, even 2 years before we could act on any of these. But the idea generation is something that we want to have really soon. When VP Lacroix and AVP Unadasami presented, and I've shared this before too, the Board of Regents want to have ideas that are somewhat actionable. And they want to have these ideas pretty soon because most of our actions will take some time, whether they be academic or going through consultation or all of these things. It will take some time before we get to benefit from some of these cost savings. And so we want to accelerate the process of the idea generations, right? And so I'm asking that through your existing groups, right, you bring about some of these ideas and we start putting them together. I don't hide from these things, and most of you will probably know that I'll invite myself to your Senate and NAEVA meetings and all of these groups, even SG, because I want to know, right? But what I don't want to do is have, 2,000 ideas that I now need to figure out and see. I think that there's an opportunity for you guys to sharpen those ideas a little bit within your groups, and then that we all, share them and have more in-depth conversations. What I want to say as a commitment to us is that I do want to use our existing structures. We have governing groups, we have budgetary processes. The only challenge that I press on is timeline, right? The timeliness of what we do is going to have to be accelerated, but I do want to make sure that we remain as open to these dialogues as possible and as inclusive as we're putting these together. And so with that, I just want to continue pressing on. We're going to send around the link again for feedback. Please work within your units to see if there are opportunities. I hope that we come into this with an open mind, right? And so I think that, look, I get to be selfish, and I do this in every one of my meetings. I promise you that I'm Leeward centric. And so it's really difficult to say, oh yeah, I could do without $2 million. I mean, it's impossible, right? But if we're not open-minded, that someone else's idea may be acted on us. And so why not be the ones contributing to the cause? And so that's what I'm asking for. It's not an exciting time, but I want to generate some level of excitement so that I have that feedback to share with VP Lacroix. And so I'll pause here. If you have any questions, please feel free to share them. But I do hope that we could work through our existing structure so that this feedback could come in a way in which we could really use it very quickly. And so we'll be continuing to host these meetings probably for the next 5 years. but it remains important for that openness, and for us to just really think outside of our typical boxes. And if you want to say, you know, anything like, I don't know, if your idea suggests impacting other campuses so that Leeward could take the lead on something, go for it. And so, but I need your feedback because I don't want it to come from me necessarily, even though I believe in it. So I'll pause here and see what you guys have, if there's anything you want to share.
Thank you, Carlos. That was very enlightening. And you mentioned about maybe consolidating the chancellor's positions. We really love you here and we don't want to lose you. So having said that, and this matter, it is somewhat more urgent than financial crisis that occurred in 2008. This is actually an economic phenomenon. The other one was basically started with financial crisis. Right now, as some of you or maybe all of you are following the stock market, the stock market has fully recovered with the help of God and central bank. But the economy actually in Hawaii, I don't recall that we had such a high rate of unemployment. Even in Great Depression, or when I was a student, the definition of who is employed, it has been changed a few times. Now, people who are only working 1 hour per week are considered employed. So those who have lost their full-time jobs and picked up a few part-time jobs, the statistics will show that these are 3 job openings, even if they are 1 hour per week. Having said that, I agree with you 100%. I think one of your great ideas among all others is that West Oahu led us to teach the lower level classes. That really saves money for students and also provides more time for their faculty to teach upper level division courses. And Leeward is not kind of a, what you call it, a foreign institution to West Oahu students. Mostly they are quite familiar with our program. So I hope they agree to this. But one thing I want to say that I'm not quite in favor of, how do you say, commoditizing courses. Like if we teach economics or English or history here, other campuses have the same courses, then we just consolidate them. I think teaching for many years and doing consulting, there is one thing we call product differentiations, which students actually differentiate between which instructor at what institution should take a particular course. And if we say, well, English 101 or Econ 120 is all the same, let's just have one and squeeze 500 students in there online, I don't think that will attract higher enrollments in our system. And I also want to mention something about, and some of my dear faculty also have been other campuses. Either they taught on other campuses or they have visited other campuses, but I've been in all 7 campuses. And I think the strength and the working environment that we have at Leeward is unbeatable. So we have a very strong foundation in increasing enrollments. And I have tested that, and it has worked not only for me, but for a few others that I know they have done that. And increase enrollments in their classes. And one thing that I mentioned to Kay, who is smiling right now, hello Kay, if we could, because the matter is a bit urgent, if we could start a 5-week winter session during the Christmas break and basically test the water. And these 5-week classes actually, it creates its own academic calendar. So we don't really need to go with the UH system calendar or with the Leeward academic calendar. It has its own calendar. And we can actually pilot a program with selected courses from different divisions, and division chairs know which are the courses that will get high enrollments, and those faculty who are willing to be guinea pigs, they try, and if it really goes well, then we will expand it for the next year, and hopefully we can have the 3 5-week summer sessions that would also increase the summer enrollments with the summer tuition, which actually is 3 times as high as the regular semester residence tuition. Thank you very much, and
Thank you for that. I appreciate that, and I agree with you, Ghulam. I mean, there are a lot of things that we probably can do, and this is an opportunity for us to begin acting on them. I think that because resources are, limited, we want to take these ideas and see what are some that we could act on with lesser effort, maybe some lesser financial backing, and see where we can make some investments to help address some of the challenges that we're living in. So, the winter sessions are a great idea. Building out Leeward's footprint and capacity is more critical now than ever. And to be honest with you, a lot of the potential cost savings that we're trying to call out are things that are not likely going to be realistic at a time where, because of unemployment, we're probably going to see a surge in enrollment. And so it's really difficult to reduce our expenses while at the same time being expected to serve a higher population. And so we're going to have to just work around some of these and put some of these ideas together. I will share too that I'm really appreciative of some of the new submissions in terms of ideas that are coming through. I guess some of you are typing them into the link as we're going through the Zoom session, so I appreciate that. I will say that a couple of things. One of them is, when you do share ideas with me through that link, know that I'm like the only one that has access to it, I think. And so I'm not going to share who you are, but it's important for me to know how I can respond to someone if I have some questions. The other thing is that if there are other ideas that you feel more comfortable through your division, that information will get to us. And so I'm going to be pressing on everyone in terms of timing. We could fall into our existing meeting structures, but let's just try to build them out as quickly as possible so that I have something to share up the chain. I will say that I don't have an idea yet, right? So this is a promise that's not well cooked, on how I can share a lot of these ideas in a way in which everyone can see what's basically being said. But I'll try to categorize and maybe create bullets and put something visual so that in subsequent Zoom meetings, we could see a refreshed version of how that feedback has been coming about.
Carlos, sorry to get the mic again. 2 quick things, and these are my concerns. One is that once we generate more revenue, I'm not saying if, but I'm saying once we generate more revenue, what are the possibilities that the UHCC system doesn't take away some of the extra revenue we made in here, because that would be a bit of a discouraging effort. So if possible, kindly ask Erica and her crew, if possible, that let us have and build on what we have here, and so as other campuses. And actually, Erica mentioned that, and Mike also mentioned, if you recall, that they will support increasing enrollments. I think just like us, that we have about $8 million, I think they have some money hidden somewhere that for emergency. I think to encourage all 7 campuses, including us, I have this idea. Why don't they just, if possible, I know it is possible, but if they want to do this, that whatever we increase tuition, they will match it. So if we increase it by $500,000 and then they match it, so it will put all campuses actually to work on increased enrollments. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I'm going to try to put that together in a way in which I could share with Erica. Although I will say that some chancellors, and I would probably argue that the chancellors that have campuses that are more financially stable have brought those concerns over again, because it is difficult. I mean, we don't want to disincentivize creativity because we're going to be, what was said at the last meeting with Erica Lacroix, potentially subsidizing the other campuses that may not be doing as well. And so I'll keep bringing that up and see if we could get some more clarity on that. But again, that's one of the disadvantages of being in a system we all more or less hurt together. But I'll keep bringing that up. And I like some of the stuff that's been happening on the chat box too, by the way, on other revenue sources. And so we're getting oodles of ideas, which is a little bit, it's the management more or less of those ideas where I think I'm going to be a little bit puzzled, but we'll work through it. And I may, work with more groups like I've been doing. I've been inserting myself in just about every meeting that I know is scheduled. And we'll continue, having these conversations, but continue thinking about these and let's see where we can contribute to the cause with UHCC and UH as a whole. And thank you, Golem, for taking that, that approach of finding ways for us to strengthen our position rather than destabilize. Anything else, you guys?
May I also share something with Mark, please? Mark, on your slides about reduction in number of lectures, expenditures, as well as the the overloads. This is how I look at it, and it was not on your slide. For any course that is offered, whether it is by a lecturer or a faculty, it costs approximately on average about $6,000, but it generates a class of 30 students with what the statistics I picked up from UHCC, that 20% of our revenue comes from non-residents, and the remaining are resident. So approximately we lose $15,000 per class on the revenue. In other words, if we reduce 25% of lectures, that would be 25% of classes taught by lecturers will be reduced, and therefore the revenue generated by lectures will be reduced by 25% as well. So as the overloads. You may want to include, like, at what cost, if we lose this many lectures or reduce the number of lectures, how much revenue will be declining? Thank you.
Thank you, Golem. I think you and I can talk more details later, but just those, remember those numbers that I'm showing are targets only, right? They're goals that the system office implemented. And just so everybody knows, Leeward, from a tuition standpoint, it's roughly about, and it's historically, roughly 10% of our tuition comes from non-resident students. 90% is resident students. So maybe that's an opportunity. I'm not sure. But again, we can talk crunch numbers and that kind of thing between us. But you're right. I mean, if we're going to focus on increased enrollment, right, then we're either going to have to do overload or lectures, right, to offer those additional classes. So we'll take that into account.
Thank you.
All right, and so I want to be respectful of time, and I know that these discussions are great. So I promise I will do more of these sessions. But in the interim, start sending that feedback through the link or through your unit so that we could gather and put them all together. And hopefully we'll have a nice visual way of sharing more or less what our thought process has been along the way. And so with that, you guys, I want to thank you so much for your time and understanding with these really difficult topics. I wish I had started as chancellor some 5-6 years ago. But it is a difficult time, and we're here for the long run, and difficult times, but we'll work on it together. And so I appreciate your commitment, and I'll see you guys on an upcoming Zoom meeting. I know some of you probably this presentation has been somewhat repeated a few times. Apologies for that. So thank you. Appreciate that. Have a good one.